Hello and welcome to Frank Philosophy, where we speak frankly about philosophy. I'm your host, Frank, philosopher. I have a BA, an MPhil, and a PhD in philosophy, and I teach philosophy at a university far, far away. And today we'll be continuing our discussion, or our read-through, of one of the most important works in the Western philosophical canon, Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy. I have two other videos in the series done already, one on the preface and the introductory material and the first meditation as well. So I highly recommend you go and check those out before you dive into this video, where we'll just start off right with Meditation 2, where Descartes gives his proof for the existence of himself, and basically establishes one of the most enduring positions in metaphysics and the philosophy of mind, called substance dualism. So this is the sort of one of the classic arguments for substance dualism is presented here in Meditation 2. I'll also say some channel-related updates at the end of the video, but not to front load that stuff. So if you're interested in that, be sure to stick around till the end, or just skip to the end with the time code below. But otherwise, we'll just get right into it, assuming that you have freshly consulted the video on Meditation 1, which was all about the method of doubt, and basically Descartes' attempt to doubt everything he knows, so that he might put all of his epistemological faith in what remains. And this, Meditation 2, is his attempt to begin to build back and identify those truths that cannot be doubted and that can bring him the level of certainty that he feels is necessary to say that we know anything about anything, what can be known, right? Okay, so it's not too long. It's only like 6 pages, but it is very dense. So we'll see. We'll see how long it takes. Okay. So without further ado, Meditation 2. Of the nature of the human mind, and that it is more easily known than the body. Okay, so I'll already start explaining before I even get into it. Substance dualism is the view that there are two fundamentally different kinds of stuff that make up the universe: physical stuff and mental stuff. And you might say, well, that's weird. I thought there was only one kind of stuff, physical stuff. But it turns out, logically, at least if you follow Descartes along the way, there seems to be a necessity for the existence of non-physical stuff as well. And the existence here is understood metaphysically, meaning that it is a metaphysically robust kind of existence, meaning that it does exist. It doesn't not exist, and Descartes will give the proof of that later on in respect to himself. I think, therefore I am. This is the text where that comes from. But he doesn't talk about it in precisely those terms. That way that I just explained it is a very sort of modern intro to philosophy course kind of way of talking about dualism, as well as, if you read contemporary work on dualism and philosophy of mind, you'll hear that kind of language. But the way that Descartes gets at this point is a bit different, and it's very much in line with his project rather than with our interests. And this happens a lot in the history of philosophy, where a thinker will stumble upon a crucial distinction or idea, and that might not necessarily be, that thinker's, his or her main project at the moment, but it endures and gets absorbed into the tradition later on as something a little bit different. So just keep that in mind. But this is about dualism. That's what this is about. Okay. The meditation of yesterday filled my mind with so many doubts that it is no longer in my power to forget them. and yet I do not see in what matter I can resolve them, and, just as if I had all of a sudden fallen into very deep water, I am so disconcerted that I can neither make certain of setting my feet on the bottom, nor can I swim and so support myself on the surface. So it's a nice analogy there, right? So he's, just got thrown into a pool or, a pond or the ocean, and you can't feel the bottom, but, he doesn't, he hasn't quite found a way to tread water yet at the surface yet. So maybe he's, in the middle of intellectually drowning, as it were. I shall nevertheless make an effort to follow anew the same path as that on which I yesterday entered. In other words, I shall proceed by setting aside all that in which the least doubt could be supposed to exist, just as if I had discovered that it was absolutely false. And I shall ever follow in this road until I have met with something which is certain, or at least, if I can do nothing else, until I have learned for certain that there is nothing in the world that is certain. Okay, so this is a peculiar way of putting the point, but basically what he's saying is, I'm going to continue the method of doubt until either I conclude logically that nothing can be known and arrive at epistemological skepticism, which is the view that absolute or certain knowledge, or knowledge at all, depending on your conception of knowledge, doesn't exist, right? We don't actually know anything. We don't actually meet the standards of knowing things. Or he does find something that he can be absolutely certain of. Now, I don't, just as a refresher, in case I talked about it last time, or I'm not sure if I did talk about it last time, but this is based on what we call a, what is it, fallibilist? Well, it's a conception of knowledge according to which you need to have absolute certainty in order to claim that you know something, right? And so this is why Descartes says, well, if I can doubt something, then I don't really know it, right? And there's all sorts of debates we could have about whether or not you need absolute certainty to have knowledge. Maybe you think that the standards for knowledge could be a little bit lower. That, for example, like, you only need 99% certainty to claim that, oh yeah, I know, something to be true. But Descartes is interested in trying to analyze and identify and build an edifice of knowledge and an entire epistemology based on things that he knows with 100% certainty to be true. So he's looking for that stuff. That's the standard. And all the stuff from Meditation 1 that he could doubt, he's going to assume that it's just false, right? If I can doubt it, I'm just going to assume it's false, just for convenience sake, right? Because if I can doubt it, but it turns out the doubts are unfounded, or it turns out that the thing actually is 100% true, you'd have to do that for each and every belief, and that just takes way too much time. So if it can be doubted, we're just going to assume it's false. So Descartes, he's just restating his methodology here. And he gives this nice analogy. Archimedes, in order that he might draw the terrestrial globe out of its place and transport it elsewhere, demanded only that one point should be fixed and immovable. So this is Archimedes, the Greek inventor, engineer, mathematician guy. And his, one of his famous quotes is, "Give me a lever long enough and I can move the world," right? And the idea is supposed to illustrate the power of physics, right? If you have leverage, applied in the correct way, you can lift huge amounts of weight with much less effort than you would otherwise just trying to lift the thing, directly, right? So it's all about using force and all the stuff that you learn in your freshman physics class. Or maybe not freshman, but in your high school physics class about leverage and force and mass and where the leverage and stuff like that, right? So this is a big imprint in Descartes' mind that we should have this kind of power this kind of certainty in knowledge, right? In knowledge of everyday things, right? And again, he wants this sort of mathematical certainty because he recognizes that mathematics is, usually it is convincing to us that it is absolutely certain, even though he does doubt that too. But this is the model, right? It's the model. It fascinates him that, geometry and mathematics can be so precise and reliable. And he wants to find what really is reliable without any possibility of doubt in any domain, right? So that's what he's looking for, the Archimedes point, right? The Archimedean point. Archimedean? I don't know, maybe that's not even a word. Okay. In the same way, I shall have the right to conceive high hopes if I am happy enough to discover one thing only, which is certain and indubitable, right? So he just needs one thing. He needs one place to hang his hat, right? He needs one point at which to apply his lever, and then he can, move the world, right? Just one fixed, solid point. Okay. I suppose, then, that all the things I see are false. I persuade myself that nothing has ever existed of all that my fallacious memory represents to me. I consider that I possess no senses. I imagine that body, figure, extension, movement, and place are all but fictions of my mind. What then can be esteemed as true? Perhaps nothing at all, unless that there is nothing in the world that is certain. Okay, so again, he always sort of says, like this skeptical worry is always in the background, right? He's always suggesting that, maybe I really don't know anything. Maybe it's possible that nothing is known at all, in which case, we'd arrive at skepticism. And the reason he doesn't want to arrive at skepticism is, well, skepticism has its own problems, right? Because you may have noticed that, nothing at all is certain unless, except that there is nothing in the world that is certain. And he says it above here as well. If I can do nothing else until I have learned for certain that there is nothing in the world that is certain, right? And that sounds like a contradiction because it kind of is, right? It's a paradox of skepticism. And this is one reason why we want to avoid skepticism, because not only is it like kind of debilitating in the sense that it means that, all knowledge is hopeless, and that really leaves us in a bad position, but it, it's also contradictory, right? It's also a contradiction. It's also a paradox. So we'd like to avoid that if possible. It would be much better if we could find something that we could know with absolute certainty. And that's what Descartes is trying to do here. Okay. But how can I know there is not something different from those things I have just considered, of which one cannot have the slightest doubt? Is there not some God or some other being, by whatever name we call it, who puts these reflections into my mind? That is not necessary, for is it not possible that I am capable of producing them myself? I myself, am I not at least something? But I have already denied that I had senses and body. Yet I hesitate, for what follows from that? Am I so dependent on body and senses that I cannot exist without these? But I was persuaded that there is nothing at all, or nothing in all the world, that there was no heaven, no earth, and that there were no minds, nor any bodies. Was I not then likewise persuaded that I did not exist? Not at all. Of a surety I myself did exist, since I persuaded myself of something, or merely because I thought of something. But there is some deceiver or other, very powerful and very cunning, whoever employs his ingenuity in deceiving me, then without doubt I exist also if he deceives me. And let him deceive me as much as he will, he can never cause me to be nothing, so long as I think that I am something. So that after having reflected well and carefully examined all things, we must come to the definite conclusion that this proposition, I am, I exist, is necessarily true each time that I pronounce it or that I mentally conceive it. Okay. So this is Descartes' first sort of move towards an idea or proposition with absolute certainty that he can know for certain. So he's found it. I think, or I am, right? I exist, right? Insofar as he's done all the doubting of all the different stuff, right? Bodies, the world, even his own thoughts and ideas, his imagination, his senses, the things that he perceived, even math, right? He's doubted all these things, right? And what's left? Well, it's the fact that he is the thing doing all the doubting, right? No matter how much doubting he does, he cannot doubt his own existence. And so now we've sort of located the beginnings of the point that will lead to absolute certainty, right? And that's all we have so far. I exist, right? So something exists, and that thing is me, right? I have some first-person access to the thing that still remains in spite of all the doubt, right? Because I doubt, I exist, right? Because I am a thing which can doubt the existence of things, right? Which can be deceived. I exist, right? So that's the idea. And this is just step one, right? So we're not, I think, therefore I am, yet we're not really there. And he actually doesn't say that directly here, even though this is like where the argument is. He actually says that in the Discourse on Method. That's where we get, I think, therefore I am, that statement, Discourse on Method, which I also have a video on that. But this is the more, the longer version of that argument where you see the different places, right? So the first thing is just I am, right? I exist, right? But I do not yet know clearly enough what I am, I who am certain that I am, and hence I must be careful to see that I do not imprudently take some other object in place of myself, and thus that I do not go astray in respect of this knowledge that I hold to be the most certain and most evident of all that I have formerly learned. Right? So he's saying, okay, I've figured out that I exist, right? I necessarily exist because I am the one who is doubting. I am the one who would be being deceived in any of these situations where the evil demon is putting, mistaken ideas in my mind, right? Things like that. But I don't actually know what I am. And I should be clear about this because it would be useless if, I say I know that I exist for certain, right? If that's the first point. But then I'm wrong about what I actually am, right? If I say that only, cheese exists, and I'm wrong about what cheese actually is, well, that's pretty, then that's not very good. It doesn't actually help us because we're still wrong, right? That is why I shall now consider anew what I believed myself to be before I embarked upon these last reflections. And of my former opinions, I shall withdraw all that might even in a small degree be invalidated by the reasons which I have just brought forward, in order that there may be nothing at all left beyond what is absolutely certain and indubitable. Right? So now he's going to try and figure out, well, what am I, using the same method of trying to arrive at the first proposition, right? That I exist. So he's going to start again with his everyday account of what he believed himself to be, and use the method of doubt to get rid of all his old, previous, and unlikely true or dubitable definitions to arrive at the core. Right. What then did I formerly believe myself to be? Undoubtedly, I believe myself to be a man. But what is a man? Shall I say a reasonable animal? Certainly not. For then I should have to inquire what an animal is and what reasonable is. And thus, from a single question, I should insensibly fall into an infinitude of others more difficult. and I should not wish to waste the little time and leisure remaining to me in trying to unravel subtleties like these, right? So, if we, and the idea of a reasonable animal or a rational animal, this comes from Aristotle and the ancient Greek definitions of what an animal or what a human being is, right? A rational animal. That's a sort of classical definition of a human being. And Descartes says that's not going to work, right? We can't try to define things. We can't try to define ourselves by appealing to other concepts right now. We have to only work with what we have that we cannot doubt. Because whatever definition of these things, of reasonable or animal, whatever those definitions entail is also going to be subject to doubt. And that, then we're off to the races, and it's just going to be, impossible. So he continues. But I shall rather stop here to continue the thoughts which of themselves spring up in my mind, and which were not inspired by anything beyond my own nature alone when I applied myself to the consideration of my being. Right? So he's saying, well, what about, when I just think of myself, I think that, I exist, and what I just sort of instantly, intuitively think about when I think about I. Let's start there, right? Let's go to the sort of first person perspective of what our immediate thoughts are about ourselves when we think about what we are as individuals, what I am, right? And instead of trying to define the I in I exist externally, right, by appealing to, an animal or rationality or things like that. Okay? So just what sort of pops into my head when I think about, I, myself. Right? In the first part, in the first place, this might be a typo. In the first place, I considered, I'm going to skip that word. In the first place, I considered myself as having a face, hands, arms, and all that system of members composed on bones and flesh as seen in a corpse, which I designated by the name of body. Right, so I have all this physical stuff. In addition to this, I considered that I was nourished, that I walked, that I felt, and that I thought, and I referred all these actions to the soul. Right, that there's this idea that only things with souls have true ability to move oneself, to move itself, of self-movement, right? So these qualities, right? Of being nourished, that I walked from here to there, I felt things, I thought, and all these sort of mental things are associated not with the body, but with the soul. Right, and this is dualism, right? That there's mental stuff, which is the soul, and physical stuff, which is the body, right? But I did not stop to consider what the soul was, or if I did stop, I imagined that it was something extremely rare and subtle, like a wind, a flame, or an ether, which was spread throughout my grosser parts. Right, so. This is very interesting, right? So the idea is that, intuitively, we might associate like all these like mental activities that we do, right? Like we nourish ourselves, we walk around, we feel things, we think things. We might associate that with a soul, but we might consider the soul in terms of like, maybe the soul is like some protoplasm stuff, right? Like something that ghosts are made out of, like a wind or a flame, some kind of physical thing that we just interact with kind of weirdly, right? And Descartes saying that's kind of like the intuitive way of thinking about the soul, right? That it's basically a special kind of physical thing. Right, so we're not quite at substance dualism yet, because substance dualism says there are two fundamentally different kinds of substances. Here, this body and soul distinction is only still within the realm of the purely physical, right? So maybe the soul is something physical, like a special kind of physical substance, right? And Descartes setting this up that like, this is what most people think, or this is about as far as most people get when they think about the soul. As to body, I had no manner of doubt about its nature, but thought I had very clear knowledge of it. And if I had desired to explain it according to the notions that I had then formed of it, I should have described it thus. Right, by the body, I understand all that which can be defined by a certain figure, something which can be confined in a certain place, and which can fill a given space in such a way that every other body will be excluded from it. Something which can be perceived either by that should be touch, either by touch or by sight or by hearing or by taste or by smell, which can be moved in many ways, not in truth by itself, but by something which is foreign to it, by which it is touched and from which it receives impressions. For to have the power of self-movement, as also of feeling or of thinking, I did not consider to appertain to the nature of body. On the contrary, I was rather astonished to find that faculties similar to them existed in some bodies. On the contrary, I was rather astonished to find that faculties similar to them existed in some bodies. Okay, so again, there's this like sort of lingering mystery of how bodies can move themselves, right? Where again, the idea is that only things with souls have the ability to move themselves. And again, souls are understood in this kind of way intuitively as a special kind of physical substance, like an ether, a wind, or a flame, right? And Descartes saying, well, this is kind of like he's just setting up what the sort of everyday sort of account of what we might consider ourselves to be, what I am, before we cut it all down, because all of this can be doubted. But this is just the sort of everyday understanding, and he's setting this up, right? But what am I, now that I suppose that there is a certain genius which is extremely powerful and, if I may say so, malicious, who employs all his powers in deceiving me? Can I affirm that I possess the least of all those things which I have just said pertain to the nature of body? I pause to consider. I revolve all these things in my mind, and I find none of which I can say that it pertains to me. It would be tedious to stop to enumerate them. Let us pass. Okay, so then he's going to stop there, right? So he's saying, okay, all this stuff I said, can I doubt all that? Can I be wrong about this, all this stuff, all this definition of what a body is, and specifically what a human body is, what I am as a human being? Can it be all this stuff? Can the definition of the I in the proposition I exist include all of this stuff about what a body is? Or could we be wrong about that because an evil demon is deceiving us? And the answer, obviously, to Descartes is yes, we can be wrong about that, so that stuff isn't going to work, right? And it would be too tedious to stop to enumerate them and to show how an evil demon can make us doubt all this stuff. So he's just going to move right ahead. And he says, what about the soul? Right, let us pass to the attributes of the soul and see if there is any one which is in me. What of nutrition or walking, the first mentioned? But if it is so that I have no body, it is also true that I can neither walk nor take nourishment. Another attribute is sensation, but one cannot feel without the body. And besides, I have thought I perceived many things during sleep that I recognized in my waking moments as not having been experienced at all. Right, so we can't rely on. So if we go to the soul, maybe the essence of human being is in the soul, right? Maybe that's what it is. Maybe the definition of the I in I exist should be found in the soul, right? And he gave some potential attributes of the soul up ahead or before, right? I take nourishment, I walk, I feel, right? That I'm an ensouled living being. And he says, well, if if nourishment and sensation relies on us having a body, then it cannot be our essence. Because if our bodies can be doubted, right? If what we think we know about our bodies can be doubted, then anything that relies upon our bodies can also be doubted. And because these attributes of the soul rely on our bodies being absolutely certain, which they are not, then the attributes of our soul that are essential to our being cannot be these. Right? Right? Like, we're wrong about, the things that we sense, because, our senses deceive us all the time. Right? And this stuff is not body, right? Because these are psychological things, right? These are things that have to do with the soul, right? Sensation, the fact that I sense things, right? Inanimate objects, things without souls, cannot sense things, right? But we can. It's an attribute of our soul, but it's not essential to us, right? Because it can be doubted. So that's off the list. All right, now we get to it. What of thinking? I find here that thought is an attribute that belongs to me. It alone cannot be separated from me. I am, I exist, that is certain. But how often? Just when I think. For it might possibly be the case, if I ceased entirely to think, that I should likewise cease altogether to exist. I do not now admit anything which is not necessarily true. To speak accurately, I am not more than a thing which thinks. That is to say, a mind or a soul, or an understanding or a reason, which are terms whose significance was formerly unknown to me. I am, however, a real thing and really exist. But what thing? I have answered, a thing which thinks. So here we go. Now, this is it. I think, therefore I am. Right, so we kind of went a little backwards here, right? It's not that, I decided that I'm a thinking thing, and from that I determine I exist. It's that he first decides that, well, he must exist, but what's the grounds of it? Why do I exist? Why can I be so certain that I exist? Well, because I am a thinking thing. And in fact, it is because I am thinking that I know that I exist, right? So if I am thinking, I must necessarily exist, right? The proposition I am thinking entails that I exist, right? This is entailment, right? Where the truth of one statement necessitates the truth of another statement. This is a very important logical relationship, and Descartes would have known it well, and that's what he's trying to prove here, right? That the fact that I am thinking entails that I am existing. In the very same way that I might say that, I have 5 fingers on this hand entails that I have more than 3 fingers on this hand, right? It's impossible for me to have 5 fingers without also having 3 fingers, or more than 3 fingers, I should say, right? Similarly, it is impossible for me to be thinking but not also to exist. And in fact, if I stopped thinking altogether, we might say that I stop existing. Okay. So that's like, I think, therefore I am. This is it right here. This is it. You ever heard that? I think, therefore I am, right? You ever heard that? This is where it comes from. This is it. This is the argument for it. It comes from that other book, the Discourse on Method, but this is the proper argument for it. Okay. And what more? Right? What more? And what more? Meaning, what else am I? Right? I have answered, I'm a thinking thing. And what else? I shall exercise my imagination in order to see if I am not something more. I am not a collection of members which we call the human body. I am not a subtle air distributed through these members. I am not a wind, a fire, a vapor, a breath, nor anything at all which I can imagine or conceive, because I have assumed that all these were nothing. Without changing that supposition, I find that I only leave myself certain of the fact that I am somewhat. This is old English whatever. I am somewhat. Now we use somewhat differently. Somewhat meaning it's like a modifier it's a modifier of adjectives, right? I am somewhat tired. I am somewhat hungry. And here he means it more literally. This is just the translation issue of Old English, right? I am, instead of saying something, he's saying I am somewhat, right? So just whenever you see somewhat here, just assume it's something, but like a little more precise, right? I am somewhat. Right. I only leave myself certain of the fact that I am something, somewhat, because we haven't filled it in yet, right? We haven't filled out the what yet. What am I? I haven't filled that out yet. I am just somewhat. But perhaps it is true that these same things, which I supposed were non-existent because they are unknown to me, are really not different from the self which I know now. Which I know. I am not sure about this. I shall not dispute about it now. I can only give judgment on things that I know that are known to me. I know that I exist, and I inquire what I am, I whom I know to exist. But it is very certain that the knowledge of my existence, taken in its precise significance, does not depend on things whose existence is not yet known to me. Consequently, it does not depend on those things which I can feign in imagination. And indeed, the very term feign in imagination proves to me my error. For I really do this if I imagine myself a something, since to imagine is nothing else than to contemplate the figure or image of a corporeal thing. But I already know for certain that I am, and that it may be that all these images, and speaking generally, all things that relate to the nature of body are nothing but dreams and chimeras. Okay, so he's trying to say if he were to, further imagine, if we were to apply the imagination to trying to figure out, okay, what else am I? I'm a thinking thing. Okay, what else? What other properties apply to me? And Descartes is saying any use of the imagination to try and, invent other essential attributes of what it means to exist is going to fail, right? Because whatever we invent in our imagination can be doubted. That's what this turn of phrase means, right? And indeed, the very term feign in imagination proves to me my error. That if I, imagine that, I am a rational animal, that I am a, whatever definition of the essence of humanity, beyond just thinking, right? Which is the basic thing. It's all going to fail. And this is just to show that, and you might say, like, why is he doing this? Well, the reason is that because he's trying to show that he's not doing that when he's saying that I am a thinking thing, right? He's trying to say that, where is it? Right. It's very certain that the knowledge of my existence, taken in its precise significance, does not depend on things whose existence is not yet known to me, right? Meaning, he's not cheating here. That's what he's trying to say. He's covering his ass. He's not cheating. He's not looking outside to try and identify things that might be dubitable as part of the definition of his own existence. Right? He's not cheating, and in fact, if he did do that, it wouldn't work, because everything that we can imagine is also subject to doubt and also cannot be relied upon. So this I am a thinking thing, right? This definition is safe. Okay, for this reason, I see clearly that I have as little reason to say I shall stimulate my imagination in order to know more distinctly what I am, than if I were to say, I am now awake, and I perceive somewhat that is real and true, but because I do not yet perceive it distinctly enough, I shall go to sleep of express purpose, so that my dreams may represent the perception with the greatest truth and evidence. Right? So he's comparing using the imagination to try and get at what the essence of his existence is. He's comparing that to trying to learn more about the world by going back to sleep and taking your dreams seriously. All right. And thus I know for certain that nothing of all that I can understand by means of my imagination belongs to this knowledge which I have of myself, and that it is necessary to recall the mind from this mode of thought with the utmost diligence, in order that it may be able to know its own nature with perfect distinctness. But what then am I? A thing which thinks. What is a thing which thinks? It is a thing which doubts, understands, conceives, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, and which also imagines and feels. Right? So this is like, so he's done a couple things here. Right? He said, I know that I exist because I have been deceived. Right? And if I am deceived, I must exist because the deceiver must be deceiving someone, right? And that someone is me, right? Because I am the thing that can be right or wrong about things, that can be deceived, and so on and so forth, right? And furthermore, that the only thing that I know my existence from is the fact that I think. Because if I weren't thinking, even if I'm thinking wrongly about the world, right? Even if I don't actually know anything about the outside world, I know that I'm thinking, right? So that's his definition of, the thing that he is, which exists for certain, a thinking thing, right? And he's saying here all this stuff about the imagination is to just clarify that when he says that he's a thinking thing, he's not like inventing, he's not making stuff up. He's not going out into the world and, combining things that might exist in ways as our imagination tends to, right? Our imagination, we close our eyes and imagine, the head of a horse on the body of a cow or whatever, right? We take two things in the world and we sort of put them together. That is the sort of quintessential use of the imagination in early modern philosophy and scholastic stuff. Like that's what precisely it means by the imagination. The fact that we can do that, right, a thing which also imagines, follows from the fact that we think, right? But this account of what we are is not created by the process of imagination. It's created only by pure intuition, by deduction, right? By logical foundations, right? So he's trying to say that this, his definition of what we are, of our own existence, right? What is the essence of a being which exists? That definition does not follow from the use of imagination, right? It's not that we're like making stuff up. We are a thing which thinks, and we can figure that out by the proof above. Okay. So it's like a psychological account of our own existence. Right? What then am I? A thing which thinks. What is a thing which thinks? It is a thing which doubts, understands, conceives, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, which also imagines and feels. Right? Now this is also where the dualism comes in, right? Because now we're not talking about the soul or the mind, right? Which he says, he said it back here. Right. Where is it? I am not more than a thing which thinks, that is to say, a mind or a soul, right? And now he's saying that this we can understand in terms that are purely psychological, not to be understood as a wind, a fire, a vapor, a breath, or something else which is like quasi-physical or like almost physical, right? So now we're talking about dualism in the sense of two fundamentally different kinds of stuff, of substance, right? There is the thinking stuff, which we are made of, right? The mental stuff, right? Which is connected to our soul, which is connected to our mind, which is connected to our thinking, and which is all this stuff, right? Doubts, understands, conceives, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, imagines, and feels, right? All that stuff. None of that is physical. All that stuff is mental. Yeah, and I think this comes back again in meditation 4, I think. This gets a more full treatment, but for now, yeah, just keep that in mind. Okay. Certainly it is no small matter if all these things pertain to my nature, but why should they not so pertain? Am I not that being who now doubts nearly everything, who nevertheless understands certain things, who affirms that only one is true, who denies all others, who desires to know more, is averse from being deceived, who imagines many things, sometimes indeed despite his will, and who perceives many likewise, as by the intervention of the bodily organs? Is there nothing in all this which is as true as it is certain that I exist, even though I should always sleep, and though he who has given me being employed all his ingenuity in deceiving me? Right? So he's building on this conception of the self through deduction, not imagination, but through deduction. Right? He's saying, well, what does it mean to think? Well, what are all the things that I'm doing when I'm thinking? Well, it's all this stuff, right? All of these attitudes that I expressed as when I was creating my whole method of doubt, and when I was, set out upon this project, right? All of these qualities, these are essential to me, right? Even if the things they were about could be doubted, the fact that I was doing them cannot be doubted. And that's the move, right? That's the move, right? Is there likewise any of these attributes which can be distinguished from my thought, or which might be said to be separated from myself, right? So there's nothing in here that is distinct from me, right? I am averse from being deceived, for example, or I imagine lots of things. That's true. I imagine many things. And I know that it's true, even if the things that I imagine are false. For if it is so evident of itself that it is I who doubts, who understands, and who desires, that there is no reason here to add anything to explain it. Okay. That I certainly have the power of imagining likewise, for although it may happen, as I formerly supposed, that none of the things which I imagine are true, nevertheless this power of imagining does not cease to be really in use, and it forms part of my thought. Right? So this is so there's a distinction between imagining stuff and the ability to imagine, right? So the stuff that we imagine, that could be true or false, and most of it is false, right? We just make stuff up when we imagine, right? But the fact that we have the ability to imagine stuff, and our imagination is itself a kind of thought. And the fact that we can imagine by virtue of being thought is part of our essence and part of what makes us exist, right? The fact that we can imagine. Finally, I am the same who feels, that is to say, who perceives certain things as by the organs of sense, since it truth, okay, this is another typo, since it is in truth I see light, I hear noise, I feel heat. But it will be said that these phenomena are false and that I am dreaming. Let it be so. Still, it is at least quite certain that it seems to me that I see light, that I hear noise, and that I feel heat. That cannot be false. Properly speaking, it is what is in me called feeling, and used in this precise sense that it is no other thing than thinking. Right. So again, so he's basically elaborating psychology, right? And he's saying that all of these psychological phenomena that we can consider as thinking, we can know to be certain. We can know to be true. We can be absolutely certain of. There's no way we can doubt that we see things a certain way, that we perceive things a certain way. We can be wrong about what the actual situation is, but we cannot doubt our own feelings. That's the claim. That's the claim. Modern psychology might disagree with this, but that's the claim. From this time, I begin to know what I am with a little more clearness and distinction than before. But nevertheless, it still seems to me, and I cannot prevent myself from thinking, that corporeal things, whose images are framed by thought, which are tested by the senses, are much more distinctly known than that obscure part of me which does not come under the imagination. Although really, it is very strange to say that I know and understand more distinctly these things whose existence to me seems dubious, which are unknown to me, and which do not belong to me, than others of the truth of which I am convinced, which are known to me, and which pertain to my real nature, in a word, than myself. All right, so what he's saying here, okay, so like just to go back to the beginning, the title of this meditation is, on the nature of the human mind, right? So we've gotten that, that the nature of the human mind, or the nature of human being, right, of myself, is to think, and he's explained all these different psychological, features that make up the mind, right? That I'm a thinking thing, I doubt, I desire, whatever, right? And now the second part is that it is more easily known than the body. Right, that's what we're getting to here. Right, so he's established that we exist and that we are a thinking thing, and he's told us a little bit about what it means to be a thinking thing, and now he's dealing with this question, this issue of, isn't it weird that we, even though this seems, or this is totally clear at this point, now that we've done this whole operation, and we've decided that this our perception of ourselves as a thinking thing is, the only thing we can know with certainty. But we're so much more certain of other stuff, which we really shouldn't be. So why does that happen? How does that work? How is it such that, really the fact that I am a thinking thing can be known with more certainty than the fact that, I don't know, I have 5 fingers right now on this hand, right? How can, the fact that I am a thinking thing, which like nobody ever thinks about, right? How could that be known with more certainty than, I have 5 fingers on my hand, or 1 + 1 is 2, or whatever, right? So how can it be that the mind can be more clearly known than the body? Right. But I see clearly how the case stands. My mind loves to wander, and cannot yet suffer itself to be retained within the just limits of truth. Very good. Let us once more give it the freest rein, so that, when afterwards we seize the proper occasion for pulling up, it may more easily be regulated and controlled. Yeah, you gotta admire Descartes' commitment. He's he writes about the philosophy with a mission. The guy's on a mission. He's trying to get at the truth, and he uses all these fun metaphors. Okay. Let us begin by considering the commonest matters, those which we believe to be the most distinctly comprehended, to wit, the bodies which we touch and see. Not indeed bodies in general, for these general ideas are usually a little more confused, but let us consider one body in particular. Let us take, for example, this piece of wax. Oh, I really should have prepared a piece of wax. Just imagine a candle, right? Imagine a candle. Piece of wax, right? Wax. It has been taken quite freshly from the hive, the beehive, obviously, right? It has not yet lost the sweetness of the honey which it contains. It still retains somewhat of the odor of the flowers from which it has been culled. Its color, its fragrance, its size are apparent. It is hard, cold, easily handled, and if you strike it with the finger, it will emit a sound, right? It can make a knocking sound if you hit it, right? It's a piece of wax, right? It's a candle. It's a hard piece of wax. Finally, all the things which are requisite to cause us to distinctly recognize a body are met within it, right? I mean, nobody doubts that it is a thing in front of us, right? But notice that when I speak and approach the fire, what remained of the taste is exhaled. The smell evaporates, the color alters, the figure is destroyed, the size increases, it becomes liquid, it heats, scarcely can one handle it, and when one strikes it, now no sound is emitted. Does the same wax remain after this change? We must confess that it remains. None would judge otherwise. So he's saying, take the piece of wax, right? You got it in your hand. It looks, it's waxy, right? It's hard, smells, it's got all these properties, right? And now we take the wax and we put it over by the fire. We heat it up. We light the candle. What happens? Well, the smell changes, the taste changes, it turns into liquid. It's not hard anymore. If you touch it, you probably get burned. It doesn't make a sound, except for like ouch, but that's you making the sound, not the wax. Just basically everything physical about it changes from our perspective. But we still say that it's the same piece of wax. It would be really weird if we said, nope, that's not the same piece of wax anymore. That would be strange. What then did I know so distinctly in this piece of wax? It could certainly be nothing of all that the senses brought me to notice, since all these things which fall under taste, smell, sight, touch, and hearing are found to be changed, and yet the same wax remains. Right, so how do we know that it's the same piece of wax if all the physical things that we recognize that it was a piece of wax at first have changed? Right? All those features have totally changed once we take the wax and put it near the fire. Okay, here's the answer. Perhaps it was what I now think, namely, that this wax was not the sweetness of honey, nor that agreeable scent of flowers, nor that particular whiteness, nor that figure, nor that sound, but simply a body, which a little while before appeared to me as perceptible under these forms, and which is now perceptible under others. So it's just like a thing, right? It's just a body, right? It's not any of those particular things that are subject to change. It's the fact that just it's a body, right? But what precisely is it that I imagine when I form such conceptions? Let us attentively consider this, and abstracting from all that does not belong to the wax, let us see what remains. Certainly nothing remains except a certain extended thing, which is flexible and movable. Right? So now it's, if we just abstract it, we say, okay, well, the wax, okay, it's not, if we were to try to define the wax based on the first set of physical properties, right, it would fail, right? Because all those physical properties can change, and yet it's still wax. And he says, okay, well, what's left? Well, I don't know. It's just a physical thing of some sort, right? He says, okay, it's a certain extended thing, which is flexible and movable, right? But what is the meaning of flexible and movable? Is it not that I imagine this piece of wax being round and is capable of becoming square and of passing from a square to a triangular form? No, it is certainly not that, since I imagine it admits of an infinitude of similar changes, and I nevertheless do not know how to compass the infinitude by my imagination, and consequently this conception which I have of the wax is not brought about by the faculty of imagination. Right, so again, he's trying to rule out the possibility that maybe our imagination gives us the understanding of the wax, right? Because no, it can't be our imagination, because nobody looks at the wax and thinks about, oh, a wax is, a piece of wax is something that can be changed into this shape, and then 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 into that shape, right? Like, even though all of that is true about the wax, right? Even though that That seems to be true, that the wax can change its shape. We don't know that it's wax because we go through all the changes that it could make in our imagination, right? That's not how we know it. So again, he's just ruling out the possibility of the imagination being where we get our account of what the thing is in itself. Because he wants to rule that out, right? Because he wants to not only because he thinks that's the wrong answer, but because he doesn't want people to accuse him of, oh, you're just making stuff up. Like, you're just using the imagination to get at an account of the wax. He's saying, no, I'm not doing that, because here's what it would look like if you tried to do that, and it would fail, right? So the conception which I have of the wax is not brought about by the faculty of imagination. Right? It's not made up of component parts and put together. And the wax is like understood as, the conjunction or the disjunction of all the different physical properties it could take. Right? That's not the way it works. What now is this extension? Is it not also unknown? For it becomes greater when the wax is melted, greater when it is boiled, and greater still when the heat increases. And I should not conceive clearly according to truth what wax is, if I did not think that even this piece that we are considering is capable of receiving more variations in extension than I have ever imagined. Right, so again, if we think about extension and all the different ways that the wax could change its physical appearance, and in terms of the amount of it, because I guess when it melts, it like takes up more space or something. I think that's a chemical thing, right? When things turn into liquid form, they take up more space, except for water, which expands when it freezes, I guess. But that has to do with like crystallization and ice. But anyway, right? So we can't just rely on the extension, right? We can't define wax in terms of it has a certain amount of properties which, or a certain behavior with respect to its extension that it meets those standards for, right? We must then grant that I could not even understand through the imagination what this piece of wax is. Right? It's not through the imagination, right? I'm not making stuff up, right? And that it is my mind alone which perceives it. Right, so this is a very old idea. Kind of goes back to Parmenides, I guess, and the idea that the mind directly perceives things, right? And that's what Descartes is saying here, right? That my mind alone perceives it, and again, because the mind is not physical, it perceives not through the reception of. Not through the influences of the thing on the physical senses, right? That's why we know that it's a piece of wax, even though it goes through all these physical changes, and we can't give a definition of it based on its physical properties. It's because the mind alone perceives it directly, right? My mind knows that that's a piece of wax, and sort of whatever you do to it physically, doesn't really matter. Whatever sort of things we can think about it in our imagination, that doesn't really matter. It's just that my mind directly perceives that, yep, that's a piece of wax, right? I say this piece of wax in particular, for as to wax in general, it is yet clearer, right? Meaning, this kind of has to do with, I guess, with the fact that the mind can more easily perceive universals than particulars, because universals are clearer and more abstract, right? So it's easier for our minds to perceive the idea of redness than to perceive any particular thing as red. That's the idea here. And this goes back to like the forms and Plato and stuff like that. But so he just drops that in there. Okay, but what is this piece of wax which cannot be understood excepting by the understanding or mind? Right. So then, what is it that we're actually perceiving? Well, it is certainly the same wax, that I see, touch, imagine, and finally, it is the same that which I have always believed it to be from the beginning. Right? So it's just the same piece of wax. What is the thing that I've been perceiving if I'm directly perceiving it through my mind and not through the senses? Well, it's the same piece of wax. But what must be particularly observed is that its perception is neither an act of vision, nor of touch, nor of imagination, and has never been such, although it may have appeared formerly to be so, but only an intuition of the mind, which may be imperfect and confused as it was formerly, or clear and distinct as it is present, according as my attention is more or less directed to the elements which are found in it, and of which it is composed. Okay, so what he's saying here is that we recognize the wax as such through intuition, right? Through the pure perception of the mind, not through the medium of physical perception, right? Not through our senses. Yeah. Okay. Yet in the meantime, I am greatly astonished when I consider the great feebleness of mind and its proneness to fall insensibly into error. For although without giving expression to my thought, I consider all this in my own mind, words often impede me, and I am almost deceived by the terms of ordinary language. For we say that we see the same wax if it is present, and not that we simply judge that it is the same from its having the same color and figure. From this I should conclude that I knew the wax by means of vision, and not simply by the intuition of the mind, unless by chance I remember that when looking from a window and saying I see men who pass in the street, I really do not see them, but infer what I see is men, just as I say that I see wax. And yet what do I see from the window but hats and coats which may cover automatic machines? Yet I judge these to be men. And similarly, solely by the faculty of judgment, which rests in my mind, I comprehend that which I believed I saw with my eyes. Right. So he's basically, yeah. So there's a lot going on in here. This is a tough paragraph. This is a doozy. So what he's saying here is that, like, when we see a physical thing, and it goes through some sort of change, and we see that it's the same thing, right? Or we say that it's the same thing. We're not really saying that it's the same thing. We're actually making this judgment that, it's the same because it has certain qualities that are shared from past to future. Even though some qualities changed, some stayed the same, and based on those, we know that it's the same thing. Right, but we don't really talk that way. Right, we don't talk that way. We don't say like, oh, I deduce that the wax is the same because it has, these qualities which are the same, and even though these other qualities changed over time, these qualities remain the same, and by that I deduce that, it is the same wax. We don't do that. Right, we don't do that. Right. Instead, we just say we see the wax, right? In the same way that when we see people walking around outside and they're covered head to toe in clothes, right? We say, oh, I see people outside. It's like, well, we don't really see people outside. Instead, we see like coats walking around, right? We see clothes walking around. All we see is like shapes moving in the distance. And yet we know, because we perceive with our minds, not with our senses, that those are actually people, right? Even though we don't directly perceive them physically. We directly perceive them mentally, even though we don't perceive them physically, right? And this idea of mental perception versus physical perception is also part of dualism, right? and this judgment, when we say, okay, I see the shapes over there, and therefore, there are human beings that are responsible for those clothes moving over there in a sort of walking motion down the street. That deduction, like all that perception, happens in the mind. That's a mental thing. That's not a physical perception, right? That's not a sensory perception, right? So we see physical stuff moving, but we perceive things as the objects they are through only our mental perception, not our sensory or physical perception. That's the idea. It's a doozy. But there you go. I think we'll see if he makes that a little clearer in the next paragraph. That might not have been the clearest explanation ever, but, this is tough stuff. A man who makes it his aim to raise his knowledge above the common should be ashamed to derive the occasion for doubting from the forms of speech invented by the vulgar. I prefer to pass on and consider whether I had a more evident and perfect conception of what wax was when I first perceived it, and when I believed I knew it by means of the external senses, or at least by the common sense, as it is called, that is to say, by the imaginative faculty, or whether my present conception is clearer now that I have most carefully examined what it is, and in what way it can be known. It would certainly be absurd to doubt as to this, for what was there in this first perception which was distinct? What was there which might not well have been perceived by any of the animals? But when I distinguished the wax from its external forms, and when, just as if I had taken from its vestments, I consider it quite naked, it is certain that although some error may still be found in my judgment, I can nevertheless not perceive it thus without a human mind. Yeah, okay, so that's the kicker, right? Imagine, think about like animal cognition versus human cognition. Think about like how easy it is to trick a dog, for example. Like when, if you like, I don't know, maybe you have a very smart dog, but if you like hide a toy, or if you, if you change a shape, if you put a mask on yourself, or if you hide a toy under a bucket or something, and the dog doesn't know what happened, right? The dog does not have as sophisticated a way of keeping track of different phenomena and attaching them to the same thing as we do as human beings, right? At least not to the same degree. I'm sure, and dogs are very smart, and they can probably do it. They can do it for smell better than we can do it for sight. So this example doesn't really work with modern understanding of human-animal cognition, but you'll agree that, it's easy to trick a dog, and how do we do it? Well, by messing with what they see, right? Because they're not as good as keeping track of the way that physical things change, even if, it's still the same thing that's, just undergoing physical changes. So again, Descartes is saying that we can perceive things that undergo a crazy amount of physical changes, not because we have an infinite imagination, but because we directly perceive those things with our minds. Right? We perceive those things with the mind. And in fact, we cannot perceive those things without a human mind. Again, animal cognition, Descartes said a lot of things. He believed that like animals were like machines, and they definitely didn't have souls. So it's not like, this is probably false, but he is making a pretty sophisticated point about, how we make judgments based on physical appearances that go far beyond just the direct perception of the physical appearances of things, right? And in fact, we are so good at it that we forget that we're actually doing it, right? Like we don't say, I see a bunch of clothes moving around outside. Those must be people, right? We don't say that. We just say, I see the people, right? I see people. There are people outside, right? Even if we don't directly see them. How do we know that there are people outside? Well, we perceive it with the human mind, right? Because we can understand that, people wear different clothes and they do different things. They have various physical properties, but if we take all that stuff away, we know that they're people, and we perceive that directly with the human mind. Okay, lots to say about that, I guess, in terms of criticism. Does this argument really work? But I'm pretty sure that's what it is. But finally, what shall I say of this mind? That is, of myself. For up to this point, I do not admit in myself of anything but mind. What then, I who seem to perceive this piece of wax so distinctly, do I not know myself? Not only with much more truth and certainty, but also with much more distinctness and clearness. Right. So he's saying, okay, so I recognize that I can know that this thing is a piece of wax. Right, and I could be wrong about it, right? Evil demon and all that, but I have a pretty high degree of certainty that in spite of all the physical changes that the wax undergoes, I know that it's a piece of wax, and that's about the wax. And if I can be so certain about that, right, don't I have to be at least as certain, and probably more certain, about the fact that I am the one perceiving the wax, right? For if I judge that the wax is or exists from the fact that I see it, it certainly follows much more clearly that I am, or that I exist myself from the fact that I see it. Right? So in order for me to perceive the wax needs to exist, which it probably does, because we perceive it with the mind, but also I need to exist. For it may be that what I see is not really wax. It may also be that I do not possess eyes with which to see anything. But it cannot be that when I see, or when I think I see, that I myself, who think, am not. Right? So even if I'm wrong about the wax, I can't be wrong that I'm the one thinking that I see the wax. So if I judge that the wax exists from the fact that I touch it, the same thing will follow, to wit, that I am. And if I judge that my imagination, or some other cause, whatever it is, persuades me that the wax exists, I shall still conclude the same. And when I have here remarked of the wax, may be applied to all other things which are external to me, and which are met with outside of me. And further, if the notion or perception of wax has seemed to me clearer and more distinct, not only after the sight or the touch, but also after many other causes have rendered it quite manifest to me, with how much more evidence and distinctness must it be said that I now know myself, since all the reasons which contribute to the knowledge of the wax, or any other body whatever, are yet better proofs of the nature of my mind. And there are so many other things in the mind itself which may contribute to the elucidation of its nature, that those which depend on body, such as these just mentioned, hardly merit being taken into account. Right? So, if it works for the wax, it works for anything. And basically saying that anything we think we know about something else is indirectly a proof of the existence of ourselves. Right? Because anything we think that we know relies on us thinking it. And if we think, we exist. So there you go. Okay. But finally, here I am, having insensibly reverted to the point I desired. For since it is now manifest to me that even bodies are not properly speaking known by the senses, or by the faculty of imagination, but by the understanding only, and since they are not known from the fact that they are seen or touched, but only because they are understood, I see clearly that there is nothing which is easier for me to know than my mind. But because it is difficult to rid oneself so promptly of an opinion to which one was accustomed for so long, it will be well that I should halt a little at this point, so that by the length of my meditation I may more deeply imprint on my memory this new knowledge. Okay, that's the end of meditation 2. Okay, whew, that was tough. Yeah, this whole wax thing, right? The idea that we perceive things with the understanding more clearly and distinctly than we perceive them with the senses. The vocabulary for expressing this stuff is it's pretty tricky. It's pretty tricky, and the argument might not even work. Right, that's the other thing. So I'm like trying to explain this argument, but maybe it's just not a very good argument. I don't know. People have certainly criticized it, but I hope you get the main idea that like when we see something, we don't see the thing. We just see the physical stuff, right? We see its physical features, and we infer that those physical features come together to form a thing, and that inference shows that what we actually think we see is being perceived by the mind, not by the senses. Right? So the senses might let us know that there's something there, but the thing that's there is perceived only by the mind, not by the senses. That's as good as I can do with the current situation. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, and that is it. As far as some channel updates go, I have recommitted to regular uploads. I will do my best to do one per month at least of these kinds of videos where it's just, this is what I want to be the bread and butter of this channel, the long form philosophy videos, just reading classic texts or not so classic texts. I want to do some modern stuff. I want to do some contemporary stuff. I can figure out how to do that with a copyright situation. I really worry probably more than I should about that, but yeah, still selecting the articles that would make a good video, and that students might find themselves most likely encountering in a course, or which are of most value to a general public. Making those sorts of decisions. That's all coming. But yeah, so this kind of long form, let's read a difficult thing together and I'll explain it as best I can. I'd like one of these per month at least. And hopefully I'd like to get through the Descartes Meditations before the end of the new year, before at the end of 2025, because I don't want to do 4 months in a row of Descartes. I'd like to break it up. So maybe, we'll see. Yeah, and then I have some other plans too. I posted some short videos, which are shorter lecture-y kind of things, where I go through some of the articles that I read in long form, but I do a shorter video with a little slideshow, just a shorter lecture that's maybe a little more digestible. We'll see how those go in terms of response or engagement. I'd also like to do some more videos on general topics like critical thinking, how to read philosophy, how to write philosophy, understanding arguments, and more general things that might be useful to a general audience or to a student body, a class of sorts. But yeah, that's about it. So yeah, if you liked the video, if you want more stuff like this, leave a like and let me know that you like it. I will continue with Descartes. We'll see you in Meditation 3 in the future, hopefully not too distant future. And yeah, with that, I bid you adieu.